I'm Mara Quinn, 38, eldest child of a family that photographs its holidays like magazine spreads and somehow forgets to include the person who sets the table. For 15 seasons of turkeys, glazed hams, frosted layer cakes, and candles arranged by color temperature, I was the pair of hands just out of frame, the one who made the moments happen and then rinsed them down the drain. We grew up outside Providence, Rhode Island, in a salt-stained colonial with a driveway that heaved every winter. My father, Russell, a civil engineer, believes most problems can be solved with quiet and graph paper. My mother, Denise, is a pediatric nurse with a heroic bedside manner and an uneasy truce with her oven. She can insert an IV without blinking, but burns garlic out of sheer nerves. Lily, my sister, is 4 years younger and understands lighting better than empathy. Her phone's camera roll looks like a brunch catalog. Theo, 8 years behind me, still gets called kiddo, even though he writes code that pays better than any of my promotions. Over all of us hovers Grandma Agnes, 15 minutes away in a tidy ranch lined with crocheted doilies. Agnes says a woman's worth is what her household looks like from the doorway, which in her mouth sounds less like advice and more like a verdict. Every Sunday we ate at my parents' place. Every Sunday she inspected the roast, the napkins, the shine on the glasses, and by extension me. I never planned to cook. At Rhode Island College I studied interior architecture because spaces felt like solvable puzzles. One semester I grabbed a night class at the community kitchen Knife Skills and Heat just to fill a credit. It turned out I loved the discipline of it, the geometry of a perfect dice, the physics of butter emulsifying into gloss, the hush that falls when a pan deglazes and you've caught every bit of flavor you made. Saturdays I started taking short workshops downtown. I kept a notebook where I pasted shopping lists, spice substitutions, drawings of plate layouts. It felt like design with steam. The first time I cooked Thanksgiving, I was 23. 3 days before the holiday, Mom slipped on black ice in the hospital parking lot and sprained her wrist. Grandma Agnes had flown to Savannah to visit her sister. Dad suggested a catered meal. Lily rolled her eyes at the thought of plastic lids in the family photos. I heard myself say, I'll do it. I mapped the oven like a schedule, nested pans and times and temperatures in pencil. I roasted the turkey over onions and fennel so the drippings would be worth saving. I tried fresh cranberries with orange zest and star anise because the recipe card said trust the perfume. I kept a pot of stock humming for emergencies. By noon, the kitchen smelled like every good decision I'd made in a month. Reactions arrived the way steam fogs a window suddenly and everywhere. Dad set down his crossword at the first bite and said, "That's impeccable." Lily asked which filter made the gravy look that glossy, and then grudgingly asked for the method. Theo, then 15 and hollow-legged, ate in silence for once. Mom, left-handed for the week, pressed her good hand to my cheek and whispered, "You saved us." My boyfriend at the time, Julian, a travel photographer with a camera bag always half-zipped, stood beside me at the sink that night, sleeves pushed to the elbow. He had chopped half the vegetables and washed all the mixing bowls as I cooked. "They loved it," I said, running water over the roasting rack. "They did," he said. "Be careful." Of the turkey, I laughed. "Of this becoming your job," he said softly, and kissed my temple. "A favor can harden into a roll before anyone notices." I told him he worried too much. I told myself the same thing. December proved him right with the casualness of weather. Mom mentioned that since my turkey had calmed the household, perhaps I'd enjoy handling Christmas dinner just this once, no pressure. I made a crown roast because the butcher winked and said I looked like I could pull it off. In January, Grandma Agnes hosted a post-holiday open house and asked if I might bring a few tasteful bites, which became an entire table. By spring, I was sketching centerpieces for Easter. No one assigned it. They didn't have to. A machine hums as long as it's plugged in. Within 5 years, the machine had a rhythm. I drafted the menu, sourced ingredients from 3 markets, prepared anything that could be made ahead, ironed napkins, polished glassware, and built the kind of playlists that make people think they're having a better time than they are. I bought a stand mixer on sale, and German knives that cost me a month of rent. The receipts bloomed like confetti from a pocket. My family offered to Venmo something, but never enough to cover the good cheese or the late-season berries that made the tart taste like August and April. Photos proliferated. In them, Lily's hair caught the window light. Theo balanced a ridiculous slice of pie. Dad half smiled with a hand still on his crossword. Mom tilted her head toward Agnes the way daughters do. I appeared at the margins, a blur at the stove, a reflection in a cabinet, a forearm delivering a platter while the shutter clicked. Julian began naming what I pretended not to see. "We haven't had a Christmas morning together in 3 years," he said, one December, as I packed the car at 4:50 a.m., with bread dough proofed overnight and a roasting pan I guarded like treasure. "My family is counting on me," I said, and it sounded noble in my mouth and heavy. "What about the life we're building?" he asked, and the question sat between us like a cooling pot, no longer bubbling, still too hot to handle. At the door, he added without heat, "They value what you do, not who you are." I promised I'd be home early. I wasn't. There's always one more pan to scour, one more sauce to fix one more. "Can you just—" to answer. By the time I dragged my supplies back to our apartment, he was asleep face down on the sofa with a book on his chest. The tree lights blinked at an empty spot where I should have been. Work, meanwhile, rewarded my habit of anticipating needs. I moved from junior designer to project lead at a small studio that renovated boutique hotels. My calendar became a grid of deadlines, and I started measuring weeks, not by days, but by what could be brined or cured in them. If you asked me, then what I liked outside kitchens and CAD files, I would have said, walking by the water and meant the fish market. After New Year's, Julian received an offer to shoot a long-form travel feature in Iceland and Morocco. "Come with me," he said. Not grandly, just as if the door were open, and all I had to do was step through it. The dates sprawled across November and December. I pictured my parents' kitchen without me, the empty timer, the unlabeled containers, the silence when a pot needs stirring and no one hears. I heard Agnes saying doorway test, and saw instead of a tidy room, a gathering that fell apart at the edges. "I can't," I said. "You know I can't." He nodded like a man confirming a measurement. We ate pasta. We watched the snow. We slept back to back, because sometimes love goes quiet before it goes away. 3 months later, he left with 2 cameras and a scarf I knitted on the train. We parted without cruelty. On his last night in town, he squeezed my hand and said, "You're extraordinary, Mara. I hope they see it." After he was gone, I filled the silence with recipes. I tested a new way to confit garlic so it spread like satin. I learned that braising leeks makes the whole house smell gentle. I told myself the work mattered because the table mattered because we mattered. When my mother called to ask about Easter, I said I'll handle it and pulled the stand mixer onto the counter like a promise. The roll had a crown, and I wore it willingly. It just didn't show up in the pictures. The months after Julian left arranged themselves the way prep lists do, neat columns that promised control and delivered fatigue. I answered to calendars, client deadlines, oven schedules, delivery windows, and tried not to notice how often they overlapped. If a week contained a holiday, it also contained me, hauling bags the size of toddlers up my parents' steps. My forearms ridged with the weight of Dutch ovens. It crept up quietly, the escalation. I'd always liked testing ideas. Now I rehearsed entire menus as if they were stage productions. 2 Saturdays in October disappeared into the logic of pies alone. I charted which apples baked down to velvet versus those that held a polite bite, which crusts flaked agreeably in my oven and shattered rudely in my mother's, where the hot spots lived on her middle rack. I woke at 3:11 one morning because I'd remembered a better way to layer the gratin so the cream wouldn't break. By dawn, I designed place cards that matched the plates Agnes preferred because harmony read as gratitude in her vocabulary. The money bled out in increments imported butter because it tasted cleaner in pastry pine nuts, because Lily's new favorite salad demanded them a wheel of washed rind cheese whose price made me bite my lip at the register, but stopped conversation long enough for people to notice they were happy. My parents offered to transfer something when I picked up the receipt folder, and I always said it wasn't necessary. Sometimes it wasn't pride, sometimes it was speed. Saying yes to help required slowing down enough to itemize what help would mean. Photos multiplied as proof that events had occurred. In them, the hydrangeas on the sideboard glowed like little moons. Lily's laughter tilted at a flattering angle. Theo posed the dog with a napkin bow tie. I flitted through, if at all a reflection in a kettle, a wrist mid-garnish, the blur of a body crossing between table and kitchen. It wasn't intentional exclusion, at least not always. It was choreography. I knew the dance and stayed in the wings. "You look wrecked," Nadia said the Friday after Thanksgiving when she let herself into my apartment with the extra key she pretended she'd stolen. We'd met in a night class in college. She became a social worker who kept potted herbs alive and collected mugs from thrift stores. She surveyed the battlefield of cooling racks and empty containers. "How many people did you feed?" 18. I said, peeling tape labels off Tupperware with my thumbnail. 19 if you count Theo twice. "Did anyone else cook?" She aimed for casual and missed. Dad stirred the cider. It was sweet to watch. I smiled at the memory, then frowned at the exhaustion that sat behind it like a shadow. Nadia opened the fridge, whistled at the architecture of containers, and closed it again. "Mara, this is not reasonable. It's a tradition," I said, and even to my own ears the word sounded like a quilt thrown over something lumpy. "Traditions are agreements," she said, perching on the counter. "An agreement needs two sides. Right now it's you and a hungry idea of your family." She left me with a quart of her soup, a text that read, "Sleep you lunatic," and an unease that followed me into work. At the studio, I had become the person who labeled samples, and people with equal accuracy. I could tell you which vendor offered the good terrazzo at a sane price, and which project manager needed a Friday reminder disguised as a Thursday joke. Boutique hotels want to feel inevitable. Inevitability is built with lists. While I argued with a contractor about the sightline from the lobby to the bar, my phone pinged with a message from Mom. "For Christmas thinking beef. You'll know what to do." No question mark. I put the phone screen down and returned to the elevation. Lily got engaged to Mark in March, a proposal staged at golden hour near the footbridge at India Point Park. The photos were flawless, her cream coat, his wool blazer, the ring held in a hand that appeared to have never known dishwater. 2 days later, Mom called and said she wants those little pastry things with the gooey cheese. "You know, brie en croûte," I translated silently, "and something impressive for dessert. Mark's mother is coming." It was presented as giddy family news, and it was, and also a to-do list that opened like a trap door. The engagement party lived at the edge of spring. I rented a van because my car couldn't carry both the food and the rented champagne coupes Lily had decided were vibes. I arrived 6 hours early to set everything up. In a burst of optimism, I wore boots that looked like I went to art openings. By noon, I had a bandage on my heel and a timeline taped inside the cabinet door. I built an appetizer bar, savory palmiers, a forest of crudités and glass cylinders, little pastry things with the gooey cheese, and a dessert table that sloped from citrus tarts to mini pavlovas. I kept thinking, if this goes well, maybe I'll get to taste something. I didn't. The guests arrived in waves. I refilled trays. I whisked a broken sauce back into submission. I redirected 3 well-meaning relatives away from the oven. When Lily tapped a glass for a toast, I hovered in the kitchen entryway, smelling like sugar and steam. She thanked Mark's parents for raising a gentleman, and Mom and Dad for love and support. She even thanked the florist by name. My name did not appear. A seam somewhere inside me tugged not enough to tear enough to notice. When Mom gathered everyone for photos, she asked Mara, "Can you fix the lamp?" "There's glare on the mirror." I adjusted the light. The portraits glowed. I stayed off camera. Between refilling the citrus tarts and scraping a streak of chocolate off a serving plate, I met Rowan. "You must be the magician," he said, leaning in the doorway with a bar towel thrown over his shoulder like he meant it. He had the kind of hands that look like they know where the heavy pan sits. "I'm Mark's cousin. I've been told not to touch anything." "That's the wisest thing they've said all day," I said, then heard how sharp I sounded and winced. He smiled, peered into the oven at the sheet of vol au vent, and asked, "What can I do that won't cause harm?" It's disarming when someone asks the right question without making a speech first. I handed him a stack of bowls and pointed to the sink. Hot water, soap, a little faith. We moved easily. He dried without clinking. He asked about my work, and when I explained the difference between hospitality design and residential, he didn't drift off at the word millwork. After an hour, when a lull fell and the oven timer ticked in an empty way, he said, "My mother used to do this. Everything. Not professionally, family professionally. She had a nervous breakdown over a cake once. "I'm sorry," I said, startled into sincerity. She'd baked it after 3 days of no sleep because she thought everyone would be disappointed if it wasn't perfect. We were disappointed anyway because she cried while she sliced it. His hand hovered in the air as if measuring something invisible. After that, we learned words like emotional labor and what it meant to share it, to notice it. He didn't say you're doing too much. He didn't have to. When the party ended, Lily hugged me breathlessly and whispered, "You're a lifesaver." Then she rushed off with Mark to pose with the champagne tower. I loaded sheet pans into the van while the string lights turned the backyard into a catalog. On the drive home, the radio played a song I used to love, and I couldn't remember the lyrics. It was the first time I could name not just my exhaustion, but my absence inside the events I made. Spring turned into lists for summer barbecues. Barbecues turned into early fall. Early fall began to taste like panic. At the studio, our Providence Hotel project ran over schedule because the Historic Commission wanted the windows to look like a year that didn't exist anymore. I was on site 3 mornings a week, then at my parents' house, evenings and weekends. My apartment became a staging area for serving platters and florist buckets. I kept telling myself I could rest after the holidays, the way people say they'll start caring for their backs after they carry one more sofa up the stairs. In September, Denise turned 60. Mom claimed she didn't want a fuss. She also casually mentioned she'd invited her bridge club the neighbor she'd taught to bake bread during lockdown and 2 nurses she'd mentored. "It's just family," she said, meaning everyone she loved was my work. I planned a 5-course dinner for 20. I took 3 days off that I couldn't afford. I piped meringue kisses at midnight and labeled them with a fine-tipped marker, as if the letters could keep me awake. During the toast, Dad careful with his words, saying she was the bravest person he knew. I was in the kitchen saucing plates. When someone finally brought me a slice of the cake I'd made, our guests had already fled into the September night. I ate the cake alone at the cleared table, the fork clinking softly. The frosting was just shy of sweet. The silence had a weight. Thanksgiving loomed again with the inevitability of weather and the jitter of a deadline. The week before, a virus ran through the studio. I caught it with the fairness of gravity. I woke on Thanksgiving morning hot and shivery and considered for an entire 90 seconds calling to cancel. Then I swallowed 2 cold pills dry, packed the car with the calm of someone tying a life raft, and drove to my parents' house with a fever that burned behind my eyes. "You don't look well," Mom said, opening the door with one hand while smoothing her cardigan with the other. "I'm fine." I lied to both of us and carried the groceries in. For 8 hours, I moved through the kitchen as if underwater. In a fogged-up world, you cling to what you can measure internal temperature on the turkey ratio of flour to fat in the roux oven times. People streamed in. Dad peered around the door and asked when dinner would be ready. Lily floated through on a cloud of perfume and described napkin folds she'd seen on a reel. Theo arrived late with a sheepish grin and a bottle of wine that wouldn't go with anything. Agnes took one sniff and announced that something smells different this year. I kept my head down. The gravy glossed correctly, the sweet potatoes browned in their corners. My hands shook only when no one could see. We ate, at least they did. My taste buds were blunt with fever. Everything sat on my tongue like muffled noise. I smiled at comments I couldn't hear. The moment the plates were carried to the sideboard, the living room filled the way rooms do when company and coffee meet, and I turned back to the mountain of dishes, the clink of plates, the hush of running water, the endless inventory of tasks. I entered the small solace of competence. That's when I saw the album. It lay open on the side counter, a leather spine cracked in the middle, like a body that had stretched too far. Someone had left it after flipping through traditions. December glitter framed in cellophane. Agnes in a red sweater the shade of arguments. Theo at 8 front teeth missing triumphantly holding a gingerbread man. Lily with a ribbon in her hair that made her look like a gift someone had ordered. I wiped my wet hands on a towel and turned the pages. The story ran backward through time last Christmas, the one before the Easter with the yellow dress theme, the 4th of July where Dad pretended to be grumpy about the sparklers, the birthdays where candles spilled their smoke like wishes had weight. In photograph after photograph, tables groaned politely under food that had passed through my hands and faces, shone with the kind of light that makes catalogs work. I saw the marks I'd made the low centerpiece so people could see one another, the cranberry sauce in the shallow glass bowl, because it caught the light, the clever use of Agnes's low cabinet as a drink station. I saw everyone I loved anchored in evidence. I did not see myself. Not exactly. I found fragments a half shoulder caught in a mirror, the tail of my sweater as I cleared plates, a grainy silhouette in the kitchen doorway, the flash reflecting off the rim of a roasting pan I carried. There I was, cut off at the wrist. There I was, blurred at the edge. There I was, a suggestion. My throat tightened like I'd swallowed something too large. I kept turning pages because that's what you do once you start a record. For 15 years of holidays, I could count the photos that included me on one hand, and in those I appeared mid-task, placing a platter zipping by, captured with my mouth open on the syllable of careful. These weren't accidents, not entirely. Someone had to take the picture. I had been the someone for too many years. But the math of it, the sheer arithmetic of an absence, reached up and closed a hand around my chest. Behind me, the house sounded like contentment. Dad laughing at his own joke, Lily explaining something to Mark that involved a lot of hand gestures, Agnes listing years like a catalog of standards. I stared at the face of my family in glossy sheen and understood the distance between being present in a house and present in a life. The towel in my hand cooled. A drop of water fell onto the album page, left a dark circle that faded as if nothing had happened. The kitchen light hummed. Somewhere a timer beeped, and I realized I'd set it out of habit for a task that no longer needed me. I closed the album carefully, as if it could bruise. The edges of the leather were soft with use. It had been held often by people who loved what it promised them. I pressed my palm flat against the cover until my breath evened out. Then I placed it back on the counter, wiped the ring my hand had left, and stood very still while the rest of the house moved without me. I didn't touch the album again. I dried my hands, stacked plates into tidy gleaming towers, and walked to the living room. The conversation paused in that small, startled way rooms do when the person who runs them steps into view. "Mom," I said, holding the leather book like evidence. "Do you realize I'm in almost none of these?" Denise blinked as if I'd asked about the weather. "You're always in the kitchen, honey." "Too busy to be in this picture?" I asked, and my voice surprised me, calm, not brittle. "It's just how holidays go," Lily said, already half turned toward Mark. "We all have our roles." "Right," Theo added, trying to make it a joke. "You feed us. It's your superpower." The air thinned. Russell shifted in his chair, the newspaper folded beside him like a shield he couldn't quite reach. Agnes smoothed her skirt and said, "A household runs on dependable hands." I set the album on the coffee table closed. "I'm going home," I said. "I don't feel well." "Dessert," Mom said, startled. "You made the cheesecake." "You can slice it," I said, picking up my coat. Snow hissed against the steps as I left. In the car, I called Nadia. She arrived with ginger tea and her don't argue face, and tucked a blanket around my shoulders. When I showed her the photos I'd snapped of the album pages, she exhaled the way people do when the obvious finally introduces itself. "That hurts," she said simply, and sat with me while the fever worked its way through. Rowan called later, the quiet at his end of the line saying more than any sympathy. I told him about the album, the missing me, the taste of nothing. He didn't offer solutions. "I'm here," he said, and I believed him. 2 weeks before the next Thanksgiving, I dialed my mother. I'd rehearsed the words so often, they felt like muscle memory. "Mom, I'm not cooking this year. I'll come as a guest." Silence. Then a laugh with an edge. "Very funny. Now about the Brussels sprouts. I'm not joking," I said. "I'll attend. I won't prepare the meal. But you always cook. It's tradition." "It's a tradition that doesn't include me in it," I said, and heard the steadiness in my voice like a floor finally leveled. "What will we eat?" She sounded genuinely alarmed. "You know I'm not restaurants book up." "Mara, this is inconsiderate." "It's 2 weeks," I said. "Plenty of time to order, or everyone brings a dish." She shifted tactics the way we both knew she would. "Is something wrong? Are you going through something?" "Yes," I said because it was true. "I'm done being invisible." We ended the call with her convinced I changed my mind. I didn't. I texted the family I won't be cooking for Thanksgiving. I'm happy to attend as a guest. This is not up for debate. Russell replied, understood. "We'll discuss with your mother." Lily called and breathed disbelief into the phone. Are you staging a protest? You know Mom can't do it. I don't have time. Why now? Because I want to be at the table, I said. Not passing by it. So you want more? Thanks, she said, baffled. I want a family, not a catering contract. Theo's solution was a budget. If this is about money, I'll contribute more. 500, 1,000. He meant well. He missed the point by a county. Agnes didn't call. Denise relayed the message. Your grandmother is disappointed. She says family duty is not optional. There was a family call which sounded like a summit and felt like an ambush. Denise pleaded logistics. Lily framed it as drama with bad timing. Theo offered to hire a dishwasher if I would still run point. I heard myself say no, and the word did not crack. 2 days before the holiday, Denise phoned with a compromise she considered inspired. We've ordered a pre-cooked turkey from Harvest Market. You can come early to heat it properly and make gravy. The store doesn't include gravy. I'm arriving when guests arrive, I said. As a guest? This is stubborn, she said, tired and sharp. It's new, I said. That's all. On Thanksgiving afternoon, I drove over with a bottle of wine and an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. The front door opened onto minor chaos, a boxed turkey sweating on the counter. 2 baking sheets of store-bought sides still cold in the center. My father stirring a pot of something pale and lumpy with heroic concentration. Oh, thank God, Denise said. We're having a situation. The directions are on the package, I said, keeping my coat on. Where do you want the wine? Can you just... She began, then stopped, eyes flicking to my hands, empty of timers and thermometers. The dining room, please. I set the table. That felt like a fair kindness. I found the good napkins, iron-creased and hopeful, and laid the silver so that it matched the photo in the album I hadn't opened again. When I came back, Lily was scrolling on her phone, narrating a reel about foolproof gravy. Theo was inexplicably assembling a Bluetooth speaker. Mark looked ready to volunteer, and then thought better of it. Dinner, when it finally arrived, was edible and tense. The turkey leaned dry. The cranberry sauce came from a can with ridges like a memory of a better shape. The lumpy gravy sat untouched after a few brave attempts. We clinked glasses anyway. Russell made a toast that landed crooked but honest. He cleared his throat and said, "To family," and did not add a single qualifier. I sat the entire meal. The chair held me as if it had been waiting. I answered questions that weren't about recipes. I asked Theo about his new project. I laughed at a story Mark told about a disastrous pitch. I passed plates that I hadn't filled. When Lily stood to take a photo, she waved me in without thinking, and I stepped into the frame. In the picture, we're not perfect, and I'm not blurred. After dessert, store-bought pies, reasonable in their way, I carried my plate to the kitchen and stopped at the doorway. The mountain of dishes looked familiar and far away. I rinsed my plate, stacked it gently, and left the rest to the people who had eaten the meal. In the hallway, Denise touched my arm. The house had thinned out. The sound of coats and goodbyes drifted like low weather. It wasn't the same, she said. It was an accusation. It was an apology. It was new, I said, and we stood there in the space that sentence made. On the porch, as I buttoned my coat, she tried again at another angle. Your father loves your Christmas ham. I'm not cooking for Christmas, I said. The words were not a threat. They were a door. I didn't add the other thing. Not that night I wasn't planning to be home. I waited until the next week after Rowan and I chose flights with our own money and non-refundable logic after I paid for a room that looked out on water the color of a story you tell a child. Then I called a family video chat. I won't be at Christmas, I said. I'm going away. To where Lily asked, eyebrows arched into punctuation. Isla Mujeres, we said. With who, Denise asked, though she knew. Rowan, I said. Selfish Lily muttered, and then louder. On Christmas. You've missed the last 15 Christmas mornings, I said quietly. You just didn't notice because I was here. Russell rubbed his forehead, the gesture he reserved for math he didn't like. Your mother is upset, he said, the closest he came to a plea. I'll call you that day, I said. I love you. Agnes phoned separately, which she rarely did. In my day, she said without preface, people didn't pick beaches over kin. In your day, I said people still thanked the person who cooked. She inhaled as if tasting a memory she couldn't place. Your grandfather always did. I'm glad I said and meant it. The pressure intensified as the date neared voicemails from Denise with tears just under the surface. Texts from Lily phrased like verdicts. A practical message from Theo about who would bring ice. I packed sunblock and 3 paperbacks and the dress that only makes sense near the ocean. Rowan showed up with a zippered bag and an ease I recognized from the way he moved in my kitchen. Nothing performative, all intent. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I switched my phone to airplane mode and slid it into the hotel safe. The world narrowed to the sound the sea makes when it decides the shore can have more of it. I woke on Christmas Day before sunrise out of habit. The sky was a gradient on purpose. Rowan kept sleeping while I walked the beach in a line the water erased behind me. At 10, I turned my phone on, intending to send love, and then put it away. The screen filled itself missed calls from Denise and Lily, and to my shock from Russell, a steady climb of texts. The turkey is still frozen from Theo at 9:14. How long to defrost? Google says days. That can't be right. From Mom at 10:28, we can't figure out the timing. From Lily at 11:55, this gravy packet is a crime. From Russell at 12:01, your mother is upset. From Agnes, relayed via Denise, your absence is felt. Nadia called just to report, amused and appalled, that she'd dropped a gift at my parents' and found Russell bent over his phone watching a carving tutorial while Lily drank Sauvignon Blanc straight from the glass. I sat on a low wall and typed a short set of instructions. Leave the turkey wrapped, put it in a cold water bath, change the water every 30 minutes until pliable. Basic gravy pan drippings plus a flour whisked in off heat, stock added gradually. Potatoes, pass them through a ricer, don't overmix. Merry Christmas. Then I turned the phone off again. The sky had already moved on. Rowan found me with coffee and a plate of papaya. Family, he asked. Family, I said, not unkindly. We ate things other people made. We swam where the reef began looked like a rumor of green. We slept without alarms. In the afternoons, I read, and sometimes drew the shape of light on the balcony floor, the way it shifted without asking me to manage it. Rowan and I talked about everything that wasn't logistics. I remembered how to laugh before considering cleanup. On the last night, we walked down the beach with our shoes in our hands. The sun slid into the water with theatrical confidence. A pelican cut the horizon into sense. Rowan stopped and turned to me. I like you like this, he said, not as a compliment, more like a fact his body knew. I didn't answer right away. The tide pulled at our ankles. I thought of the album of the empty space where I would have been if someone had turned around and asked me to stand still. I held his gaze until I knew something solid and then nodded. The plane home lifted over blue and landed in gray. Providence in late December smelled like wood smoke and bus exhaust. My apartment was exactly where I left it. A staging area made quiet. I set the suitcase by the door and stood in the small hush that follows a choice, listening to the radiator tick. Outside somewhere, a siren went by and faded. The room did not ask me for anything. I took off my coat, hung it on its hook, and let the silence hold. The apartment held its quiet for 2 full days. Then my phone broke it with Denise's name. She didn't ask to talk. She asked to meet. We chose a small cafe near my place where the tables were close enough to make people edit themselves. She arrived with a particular tiredness. I used to wear the kind that lives behind the eyes. You look rested, she said, after circling the sugar packets with one finger. I am, I said. She studied the steam from her cup. Christmas was a mess, she said finally. The turkey fought us. The potatoes turned to paste. Your grandmother narrated the decline like a sportscaster. She tried to smile. It came out thin. I didn't understand how many decisions you make before anyone sits down. I let the quiet sit until it could hold something. She looked up. I'm sorry, Mara. I took you for granted. We all did. Thank you, I said. The words landed where the apology had aimed. She hesitated, then added almost conspiratorially. Your father signed up for a cooking class at the community center. He says he wants to be useful. The surprise must have shown on my face. She huffed a small laugh. We've had 2 emergency dinners since. One involved blackened noodles. He was very proud of the smoke alarm. 2 days later, Russell sent an email. No subject line, just a paragraph that sounded exactly like him. Plain careful sentences, an apology with no decorations, and a report that gravy thickens faster than a person expects. I wrote back, Thank you. I see the effort. Lily took longer. Her messages stayed sharp around the edges, written from the altitude of a wedding spreadsheet. Then she texted coffee. At the cafe, she flicked her straw at a condensation ring, making and erasing a halo. I hated how Thanksgiving felt, she said without preamble. I hated that I didn't know where anything was. I hated Mom being brittle. I hated you not fixing it. She looked up. I still think your timing was rough. I know, I said. She sighed, surrendered an inch. I get it now, the part where it was all on you. I don't like that either. She reached across the table and tapped my knuckle with one finger. Next time tell me what to bring. I mean it. Theo didn't need prompting. He called from a grocery aisle, sounding both eager and appalled. Did you know there are 9 kinds of paprika? I thought there were 2. I'm doing Mom's list and I've read 4 blogs about yams. Also, I'm sorry. For the money comments. I missed the point. We met for ramen. He told me about the household he discovered he didn't know drawers that hide tools, times that matter the way a sink becomes a clock. I'll chop, he said. I'll lift. I'll wash. Just tell me where you keep the measuring cups. Agnes waited for a gathering to stake her ground. It came in January at Denise's table. No crown roast, no elaborate centerpiece, just a mix of casserole dishes and bowls that didn't match. We each brought something. Russell contributed a pasta salad with olives arranged like punctuation, so Agnes said, cornering me in the hallway while coats rustled on hooks. You went to an island for Christmas. No judgment in the tone, just an audit. I did, I said. Your mother was heartsick, she said, adjusting her brooch. Dinner was. She searched for a word and selected one she trusted disappointing. I heard, I said. We stood with the hum of the house around us. Her eyes sharp, even when kind traveled my face. In my time, a woman kept the whole thing together. In your time, I said, did someone thank her for it? She wasn't ready to offer the answer immediately. Then her expression tilted. Your grandfather, did, she said. Every night at the sink, even when his back was bad. He said it out loud. She gave the smallest nod approval, and Truson won. That mattered. February brought Russell's birthday, and the first test with steaks. Denise asked me to help plan the menu, not take it over. We made a list together at our kitchen table, 2 mains, 3 sides of cake you could slice without drama. I prepped with her, showed her how to trust the thermometer instead of the clock, and then handed her the spatula when the moment came. Russell made the pasta salad from class Too Many Olives, Too Much Pride exactly right. Lily arrived with a lemon tart boxed like jewelry. Theo set up a drink station with a hand-lettered sign that read, Not fancy, just good. Rowan brought flowers and a willingness to do whatever job had no applause. The meal tasted like participation. Conversation didn't bottleneck in the doorway to the kitchen. When someone called for photos, nobody pointed me toward the lamp. I stood shoulder to shoulder with my family while the timer blinked down. In the pictures, I'm not a blur or a reflection. I'm squarely in the center, a hand on Russell's shoulder flower on my wrist I hadn't noticed until later. Cleanup happened without speeches. Plates scraped themselves. Theo figured out the dishwasher like a puzzle he wanted to solve. Denise and I dried passing towels without looking. Agnes, seated with a cup of tea, watched the room move and said almost to herself, This reads right. Rowan stayed after everyone left, carrying trash to the bins, restoring chairs to their habitual angles. Back at my apartment, we cooked late. Nothing layered or impressive, just skillet chicken with lemon, a salad that forgave knife work after midnight. He poured wine and leaned against the counter. Do you miss it? He asked. Some of it, I said, tasting the sauce. The making, not the vanishing. He nodded as if he'd been in the room with the album. Then keep the making, he said. On your terms. We ate at the small table by the window. Outside, the streetlights blurred the way they do when there's salt on the air, even this far from the water. On the fridge, I pinned one photo from Russell's birthday. Denise mid-laugh, Lily's chin on her hand. Theo half-turned, Russell's eyebrows lifted like punctuation. Agnes approving the cake with her eyes, Rowan caught in the background looking at me, and me not moving, not carrying, not rushing, just there. The next Sunday, I brought over soup and herbs for Denise's windowsill. She showed me the shopping list she and Russell had written in pencil, as if practice could be erased and tried again. We looked at it together, then at the kitchen we both knew like a blueprint. She handed me a mug and leaned against the counter in the spot I'd spent years occupying. Neither of us said anything grand. The kettle ticked as it cooled. The room for once held all of us. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.